Hello, everybody. It's Dan Ryan, PMP. And how is everybody doing today? And thank you for joining me for Project Life Cycles and the stage gate process and procedure explained. All right, 0.5 PDUs under technical project management is based on the PMI talent triangle. So let me just welcome you today. If you'd like, you could please say hello in the chat. And we are now going to get started. All right, so today is a class that is called Project Life Cycles and the Stage Gate, sort of abbreviated. Good day, Munawar, and hello, Bradley. All right, now I am the University of PM. Now, when you go to fill out your PDUs on PMI, you might see a drop down in their little widget, and it might say the University of this and the University of that and the product. Don't worry about that. I'm not in that drop down list. You're just going to type University space of space PM and just hit tab and go to the next field. It'll be worth 0.5 PDU in the category of technical project management. All right, so I'm continually obsessed with the project management framework, and I like talking about the inputs, the project planning, which of course include project life cycles, and the stage gate process is a very important touch point along the project's route, which allows the senior portfolio to check into things as they go through the project life cycle, right? So thanks for coming. You're taking the right step. This half hour is going to be a nice little deep dive. We're going to move kind of fast, right? Don't try to take notes, sort of just sit back and let it be absorbed. Now, even if your organization is not currently effectively using these different types of things, you might be in a small company, maybe there's no PMO at all. But after this, you might have some ideas about maybe bringing back some of these things back to your organization. All right, so aside from what we're doing today, the other two areas of the triangle that you need to keep aware of are leadership and strategic and business management. All right, how is my volume sounding, guys? Am I clear? Okay. PMI requires that each PMP credential holder, get those 60 hours every 3 years. I just re-upped. Everybody who earns a PMI certification will do 60 PDUs with a minimum of 35 in the category of education and 25 in the category of giving back. So my recommendation to every person who's earned that PMP credential is go to that site and download that CCR handbook. Upon a careful review of that handbook, you'll have a good understanding of how you can get them. There's like one subcategory called working as a practitioner, right? I think you used to be able to get up to 8 PDUs just for talking about what you did on your current project. All right, so that's a whole thing unto itself. I also have the handbook for easily downloadable right off of the documents on my website inside the training portal. Have you guys used the training portal? Anybody been in there and looked at a few of the recorded classes? How do you like the system? Do you know how to log in? If you don't know how to log in, let me know and I'll tell you how to log in. All right, so again, here's where we are. Project life cycles and the stage gate process and procedure explained. All right, so very familiar to us: initiating, planning, executing, controlling, and closing. The 5 PMI process groups. We'll start with the initiating process group. Those processes performed to define a new project. Planning group, establish the scope. Hi, Cortina. Refine the objectives, define the course of action. Executing, hands-on, here we go. This is where we open the paint can, the rubber meets the road. We, satisfy the plan. Monitoring and controlling. Okay, we're going to be tracking the actuals and measuring them against the original plan. Closing, we're going to close the project or phase. Now, I won't lie to you, I struggle with this to this day, that, I don't really know why they make such a big deal out of it, but they say that, no, project phases are not the same as the process group things that PMI is talking about. The PMBOK guide mentioned it's related by saying that the life cycle is managed by executing a series of project management activities known as project management processes. And that every project management process produces an output, and you hand off the output to the next process. The output could be a deliverable or even an outcome. They say that project management processes are logically linked by those outputs. And it usually results in an input to go to the next one or a deliverable to go to the next phase. I have another PDU lesson called Project Life Cycles and Process Groups, where I described that a project life cycle is the series of phases that a project passes through from its start to its completion, and it provides the basic framework for managing the whole project. When I train my PMP students, something that they have a great amount of difficulty with is understanding that the phases could be sequential, iterative, or overlapping. So here you can clearly see that some of these phases, multiples of them occur at the same time. Project life cycles can also be predictive or adaptive. With a project life cycle, there's generally one or more phases, and these are called the development life cycle, predictive, iterative, incremental, or even hybrid. Now, in a predictive life cycle, the scope, the time, cost, and all those things, schedule, that needs to be updated to the word schedule, and any changes to the scope are carefully managed. We don't like change, we call it scope creep. Change is a dirty word. In iterative, the scope is also generally determined early, but we have an opportunity to add as we go. In an incremental life cycle, the deliverables produced through a series of shorter iterations. And the difference between incremental and adaptive is incremental, you literally add a little additional piece as you go. But adaptive would be more about going from a vague rationalization of an idea and then working with the customer to evolve to a specific product with highly specific qualities, requirements, and acceptance criteria. A hybrid life cycle would be a combination of that waterfall and agile approaches. Perhaps the planning of the project could occur with very structured and traditional waterfall project management plans. But then when we get to the execution of the project, maybe we add in a few agile techniques like daily stand-ups or a Kanban board or a burn down chart. The PMBOK guide concludes by saying, look, it's up to the team to figure out what's best for them. And the flexibility is achieved by identifying the needed processes, performing them in the appropriate way, and tweaking things and adjusting attributes as you go. Project life cycles are independent of product life cycles, which may be produced by a project. A product life cycle is the series of phases that represent the evolution of a product, from concept through delivery, growth, maturity to retirement. The value of using project management in really managing projects. Project management will allow an organization to break down a project into separate project phases, and thus will allow for ensuring that each of the project is given the appropriate time and consideration. We know that a common failing within projects is to get going as fast as possible rather than taking the time to do it properly. It's much easier to make changes earlier in the project. Once you're in execution, the cost of changes can become prohibitive. All right, a little bit more information on these life cycles. As a top project manager, a clear understanding of the application of the project life cycle is critically important. Life cycles are similar for all projects, regardless of their size or complexity. Whether the project's phases come A to B to C, or they're all sequentially, that's the life cycle. Now, most projects consist of the following life cycle structure, where we have a beginning of the project, a planning of the project, an execution of the project, and a closing of the project. And you might say, where is monitoring and controlling? Well, you know, monitoring and controlling really spans those four. The development life cycle consists of the phases of the project which are associated with producing the product. A development life cycle is performed within the project life cycle. And to ensure that you avoid confusion between a product life cycle and a project life cycle, Coach Dan provides the following. A product life cycle consists of the phases that represent the full development of the product idea for market delivery and then eventually to retiring or sunsetting the product. A project life cycle is a series of phases from the start of the project until the end. Therefore, product and project life cycles are truly independent of each other, and I hope that is very clear for you. But two other important areas that I would like to cover with you are life cycle categories and life cycle characteristics. As stated earlier, the PMBOK guide shows that there's 4 categories of development life cycles and there's 2 categories of project life cycles. Each of these life cycles continues the phases that I just covered. Now I'll review in detail the development life cycle, predictive development life cycle, also known as plan-driven life cycle or waterfall. Changes are monitored very closely, and they're only permitted if they're critical to getting the project done. Change request approval, perform integrated change control, the change control board, right? Iterative development life cycle says, look, project deliverables are defined early in the development cycle and progressively elaborated as we go forward, progressive detailing. The schedule and cost estimates are continually modified as the burn down of the scope occurs and the end of the project comes into focus. The product of the project continues to evolve because we're continually adding functionality during these little sprints. The increment development life cycle is similar to the iterative, but the incremental approach uses predetermined periods of time, where a little chunk, like that's where the chunks come in, a little extra chunk is added. The deliverable is considered complete after the final iterations are finished. Iterative and incremental development life cycles are a perfect choice for large, complex projects. A hybrid development life cycle is a combination of waterfall and agile. Typically, the elements of deliverables that are well known can be done with waterfall. Execution is often using more agile methods. So project life cycles are either predictive or adaptive. To provide you with an example, the development life cycle might be incremental, whereas the project life cycle might be predictive. So keep in mind that Coach Dan's already discussed predictive. So now let's look at the adaptive. This is not the adaptive, is it? Sorry about that. Adaptive life cycles are incremental or iterative. The scope's determined early, but where we allow for some reprioritization and some changes at the beginning of the sprints. You can always check out page 153 of the Agile Practice Guide if you want to learn more about progressive elaboration. And I recommend that this method should most likely be chosen when active participation by stakeholders is needed, or when you and the project team are not certain of all the requirements, or when the work for the project's in an environment that contains a great amount of change and uncertainty. All right, that life cycle produces a shippable product, something that's ready for the release and for the customer to use, created and delivered through the use of a time-boxed activity. All iterations required a planning process group, and most will perform all the project management process groups as well. All right, life cycle characteristics include project phases and project life cycles. All right, as a result, most projects have the following characteristics in common. In the beginning of the project, there's not much going on, not a lot of money's been spent, not a lot of people are hired. As the project progresses, cost and staffing levels increase and go up. The majority of the project money and resources is going to be spent in execution, and the potential that the project will come to a successful ending is the lowest at the beginning of the project. Risk is highest at the beginning of the project. Unfortunately, we don't know what to do about it because so much is unknown. So risk is the highest at the beginning of the project. Cost of changes is very low, but the paradox is we don't know where to implement the changes, even though the costs to implement them would be low. Stakeholders have the greatest chance of influencing the project, and we want to keep an eye on their power and influence. The same situation exists within the PMBOK with the process groups. Remember them now: initiate, plan, execute, control, and close. And going back to the PMBOK, they said, look, it's possible that these groups could all be represented. People struggle with that to this day. They say processes within a phase. What the heck does that mean? What they're trying to say is that, look, as projects are separated into these distinct phases, processes in each of the groups are repeated as necessary. So I suppose you could do what? Create WBS in different processes or different types of tailoring. But it gets tricky when we look and see how Here's a colorized version of the overlap of those process groups. All right, look at this little area here in the beginning here. This little space here visually represents that initiating, planning, executing, and monitoring and controlling are all happening right there. Project lifecycle is that combination of all those things, sequential, iterative, or overlapping. And the names of the phases and things can be unique to the organization or even to the type of the project, right? A construction project can have a roofing phase. A software project can have a coding development or design phase. Phases are time bound. And they are re-examined based on the current environment. At that time, the project's performance is compared to the project management plan to see if there's a variance. All right, before I go to the next major area, I just want to cover, we're going to be talking about the stage gate process and procedures. I just want to wrap up life cycle. The life cycle can be influenced by unique aspects of the organization. And while every project's got a start and an end, the specific deliverables and work that take place vary widely depending on the project. The life cycle provides a basic framework for managing the project regardless of the specific work involved. And though varies project sizes in vary and size, the amount of complexity they contain, generally speaking, we mentioned they have starting the project, organizing the project, carrying out the work, and closing the project. Project life cycle, as represented by PMI. All right, let's talk about the stage gate and process and procedure. I remember when I started working for a banking institution years ago, they had a very strict PMO that would hold very strict phase gate reviews at the end of each phase, like hold points between each stage. And if you and the project team utilize a typical life cycle as the shown in the ones that I've talked about, then you'll easily see some of the typical gates that may be set up. And at each stage, approval is going to be required to continue. The process requires documentary evidence at each stage. We want to have really quantifiable metrics that are used to measure the success of the project. All right, because the stage gate process is a generic process which can be applied to any size of project, but keep in mind the level of detailed will be governed by the nature of the work and the complexity of the work. Let me show you this diagram here. I don't suppose there's one right way to do it, but generally speaking, here we have, discovery, ideation. They ramp a project up, they scope it, they get it going. In gate 1, they figure out the idea. In gate 2, they look at the scope. In gate 3, they make sure it's a valid business case. They go to development. In stage 4, I suppose they check the deliverables or do some attribute sampling. And then they allow it to go to testing with the customer. And then in stage 5, if it checks out, they can go to launch. So, all right. Here's another way of seeing it. All right, so gate 1 is the idea, the ideation, the brainstorming, the mind mapping, meeting with the business, chartering, agile charter, or I don't know, waterfall charter. Stage 1, you go to your scoping, you go to your requirements, your scope statement, your burn down chart, your product backlog, whatever methods you have for visually representing those depictions of scope. They're called context diagrams. All right, so then gate 2 says, let's look at that scope statement. Let's check out that sprint backlog. Let's see what you got for scope. Let's verify the business case aligns with the return on investment, right? Project selection methods have to be involved. And then we're going to go to development. So a series of sprints, perhaps, or iterations, or increments, or phases. And then it proceeds through there, right? Here's another example. All right, so the PMBOK guide provides the following information, which I'll use as it's clear, and it's directly to the point around stage gate. Right, under section 1243, they say a phase gate is held at the end of a phase. The project's performance and progress are compared to project and business documents included, but not limited to, the project business case, the project charter, the project management plan, and the benefits management plan. A decision is made as a result of this comparison. Go, no go decision. And, it depends on your PMO structure. You might have a directive or controlling PMO that could shut your project down or not. But basically, whether the PMO does it or someone else is doing it, the options are you could continue or with a modification or remain in current or project terminated. Now, depending upon the organization, the industry, or the type of work, phase gates, all right, they can be referred to in different ways. All right, now moving toward the conclusion of phase reviews and phase completion, let's get more information on project phases, which can improve our projects. All right, most projects are divided into the phases. A project phase generally consists of segment of work, and the work produced during the phase is unique to that phase. Project phase is determined in any number of ways. Okay, the type of project itself and the industry that your organization may be in may actually drive the phases of the project, as could also exist with decision points, such as milestone completion or a go, no go decision. The number of phases in the project life cycle depends on the project complexity and the industry that your organization is in. According to the PMBOK guide, phases are described by such attributes as name, number, duration, resource requirements, and an entrance and exit criteria. For example, information technology projects might process through phases named requirements, design, development, test, and implement. Many industries use a feasibility study as one of the first phases of the project, sort of like also known as a proof of concept, a POC, a proof of concept, right? Because that feasibility study will let them know if it's worth it, if it's viable, if it's marketable, if it's sellable, if it's safe, or if it's good for the environment. The completion and approval of the feasibility study triggers the starting of the requirements phase, then goes to the design phase, the build phase, the testing phase, acceptance phase. Project could be canceled if the feasibility study says that it's not worth it. All right, phase reviews evolve throughout the life cycle. They could be handoffs or transfers. A phase review should be held at the end of each phase, used as a powerful touch point. All right, what questions do you have, guys? Are there any questions about what we've gone over today? Please let me know. All right, I hope you enjoyed it. And again, don't forget this class was worth 0.5 PDUs on the category of technical project management. All right, and I really appreciate you guys being with me today.